It is officially no longer a secret that Evergrande, one of China's largest real estate developers, is on the verge of bankruptcy. They are the most indebted real estate developer in the world with over $300 billion worth of debt that they can't afford to repay. And all of this is causing major scares as to how the Evergrande crisis is going to impact China's economic growth and the global economy. See, real estate development has always been a big part of China's GDP, but what's happening with Evergrande is really shedding some light that this wasn't really sustainable in China, and we're learning that this growth was largely fueled by real estate investors buying up a bunch of homes and apartments that nobody ever ended up moving into. In today's video, we are going to talk about exactly what is going on with the Evergrande crisis, and we'll talk about how China has become so overbuilt that there are literally ghost towns of houses and apartments sprinkled all over the country. Even though this is a real estate channel, I hesitated to do a video on the Evergrande crisis because, to be honest, it's just kind of a dry topic. But after diving into the details, I really do think that this is a fascinating story, and I hope that after watching, you guys feel the same way. Evergrande was founded in 1996 by a guy named Zhu Jian as a real estate development company during a real estate development boom in the country. In a very simple way to explain it, a company like Evergrande borrows money to buy land, then they borrow more money to build houses, buildings, and skyscrapers, and then at the end of the project, when it's all finished, they either sell or rent the real estate out. Evergrande is at the top of their class when it comes to real estate development, taking on over 1,300 unique real estate projects in over 280 cities across China. Considering that each commercial real estate development project can cost hundreds of millions of dollars or more, it's no surprise that Evergrande has amassed a whopping $300 billion worth of debt. Around 2015, the company did expand their business model into other industries outside of real estate, including healthcare, consumer products, health insurance, and electric vehicles, but their bread and butter still is and always has been real estate. It's no surprise that Evergrande started to expand their business model because a real estate development company really only has two primary funding sources, and those are debts from banks whenever they're constructing a new project, and then of course taking deposits from customers whenever their product sells. When you're relying on just these two funding sources over the course of 25 years of real estate development, naturally your debts are going to grow faster than you can keep up with, especially when your product isn't selling. The summary of Evergrande's debt problem that has been all over the news can be summed up like this. There are two massive interest payments that Evergrande has needed to pay back on their debt by Q3 of 2021. The first for $83 million, and then a second payment due of almost $50 million. Seemingly out of the blue though, Evergrande recently shared with their investors that they were not in a position to be able to repay this debt. They wrote this letter to investors on September 14th, and I won't bore you guys with all of the details, but here on page 2, they said, the month of September is typically when real estate companies in China record higher contract sales of properties. However, the ongoing negative media reports concerning the group have dampened the confidence of potential property purchasers in the group. The company expects significant decline in contract sales in September, thereby resulting in the continuous deterioration of cash collection by the group, which would in turn place tremendous pressure on the group's cash flow and liquidity. That's a mouthful, but it's really just a fancy way of saying that they are in serious financial trouble and that their investors should be gearing up for the worst. Some people are comparing the Evergrande crisis to what happened to the Lehman Brothers back in 2008, and if you don't know that story, I highly recommend that you go and watch The Big Short to get the scoop. The gist of the story is that in September of 2008, the Lehman Brothers unexpectedly collapsed. Then they dissolved $600 billion worth of assets, and that proceeded to cause the worst financial crisis that the United States has seen since the Great Depression. The Lehman Brothers and Evergrande isn't exactly an apples to apples comparison, but it is close enough. Plus, Evergrande just so happens to have almost the same amount of assets that the Lehman Brothers did back in 2008. Evergrande's chairman seems to be pretty confident though that this will not be the end of them, because he sent a letter to all of his employees as this was starting to make headlines. This said, I firmly believe that with your concerted efforts and hard work, Evergrande will walk out of its darkest moment, resume full-scale constructions as soon as possible, and achieve the pivotal target of delivering the property projects as pledged. My personal opinion after seeing how many vacant development projects that this company has on their books is that they will never be able to untangle themselves from this mess unless the government hops in and offers them some kind of a bailout. There is one primary catalyst for what has caused this Evergrande crisis and for what is putting other property developers in China under pressure, and that is when the Chinese government announced a 3 red lines regulation last year. The regulation was meant to target real estate developers developers just like Evergrande, and it was meant to make sure that these companies didn't go into an unreasonable amount of debt. Rule number 1 of the 3 red lines is that real estate developers should have a liabilities to assets ratio of below 70%. Rule number 2 is the ratio of debt to equity should be below 100%. And rule number 3 is that they should have a cash to short-term borrowing ratio of at least 1. Evergrande has failed all 3 of these red lines, meaning that they are at serious risk of defaulting on their debt or even worse, bankruptcy. Out of all of the real estate developers in China, Evergrande and this other company called Guangzhou R&F Properties are the only 2 developers that are in breach of this 3 red lines metric. This is scary for those developers who are not meeting because this is definitely a sign that their company is in some financial trouble, but it's even scarier for China's economy as a whole if a company like this defaults because real estate accounts for nearly 30% of China's GDP. As if the looming default on Evergrande's debt wasn't bad enough, it has drawn attention to a much bigger problem going on in China's real estate market, and that is the countless ghost towns that exist all over the country due to developers overbuilding. I'm pretty in tune with what's going on in the real estate market myself, but I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know about any of this until I started diving into the Evergrande crisis, and what is going on over there is insane. So here's the deal. For the past 10 years or so, these Chinese real estate developers have been building houses and apartments all over the country like crazy, way faster than there was demand for housing. Sometimes their finished products would sell, sometimes they wouldn't sell and they would just sit vacant, and then other times they would sell but to real estate investors who would never end up moving into the houses. All of this building activity with such little demand has led to some pretty unbelievable stats. First, China has almost 50 million unsold properties as of the last report, plus there's about another 100 million properties that were sold to Chinese investors who never moved in or rented out the homes. So this means that there are somewhere around 150 million unoccupied properties all over China that are just sitting there deteriorating and collecting dust. There are a ton of articles and photos all over the internet that showcases these ghost towns due to China's overbuilding, but I found this one from this website called Living101 that sums it all up pretty well, so let's check that out together. Okay, so this article is appropriately titled Eerie Photos of China's Abandoned Ghost Cities, and this article gets into like 20 examples of overbuilt real estate in China, but we'll just zoom through and look at some of the more interesting ones together. So first up is this reclaimed land from the sea. This is a city called Nanhoi, which is over 80 square miles long and sits almost completely empty. Then next we've got this city called Ordos City, which was built on top of a desert village. And according to their comments, only like 10% of the city ended up getting occupied after the developers spent $165 billion on it. Okay, so this one of the Pentagon is pretty nuts. So apparently Chinese builders are big on replicating Western cities. So they built out this replica of the Pentagon in 2009. This building is over 1.6 million square feet and is completely uninhabited. Pentagon example is kind of hard to top, but check out this place. It's in what they call the Qingbashi district. They say that this city does have about 30,000 residents in it, but the city was built for 300,000 people, so tourists actually come here just to experience how ridiculously empty it is. Down here is another photo of that Qingbashi district. This is showing this street sweeper guy with nothing to sweep, which is pretty funny. But nice to see all of those apartments in the background and know that almost none of them are occupied. The bottom half of this article gets into the ghost highways that leads to these cities, which apparently is also pretty common all over China. And it's wild to see just a few people walking down the highway in this shot with no cars. That's definitely not something you see every day. These last batch of photos are featuring the buildings that never even got finished, like this one of the US Capitol, or another replica anyway. They say this place was built back in 2007 in Wuhan, and to this day, it has still not had any guests because the developers ran out of money before the project was even finished. If you're like me, you're probably wondering how the heck this happened and got so out of control, and the answer is pretty simple. Both the Chinese government and the Chinese developers way overestimated the amount of people who would be interested in moving to these urban areas where they were building. See, the government made out big whenever they sold this land to developers to build on, and then those developers were incentivized to build more housing on that land, but it it doesn't seem like either side was paying attention to demand. According to The Economist, China is building 5 times as many housing units as the US and Europe combined, and these ghost towns are showing that that is definitely not sustainable. China has found themselves in a pickle when it comes to what they should do about some of these real estate development companies who are in a ton of debt, but the good news is that most of the real estate development companies out there seem to be in pretty good shape financially. It's hard telling at this point if China is going to swoop in and bail Evergrande out of this mess or if they're going to have to figure it out on their own, but at this point it seems almost certain that they'll at least be given more time to figure out what to do and restructure their debts if needed. My guess is that the Evergrande crisis alone is not going to lead to a global economy collapse or recession in the short term, but the real estate market in China is going to have a scar in it for a while as they sort through this mess that they found themselves in. Demand for new houses in China is sure to go down as a result of all of this news because in the past, a lot of these buyers were putting down deposits or paying in full for these properties before they were even finished being built. And who's gonna feel comfortable doing that when they know that the country's biggest real estate developer is in financial trouble? If you enjoyed the video today, guys, if you could just do me a quick favor and hit the thumbs up button down below, that would really help me out a lot. And let me know in the comments too what you think of this whole Evergrande crisis and what you think the future looks like for China. Also, remember to click subscribe if you're not already a subscriber because I'm posting new videos every week and I'd love to have you here for those ones as well. But that's all I've got for you guys this time. So until next time, see ya.